I felt like in the last year or so, like a lot of our students really have like been able to track better.
Yeah.
They want more in-depth stuff.
They're rebuilding some muscles.
I think so.
They're even like in conversation, like they're more verbal, like they're more conversational.
They're funnier.
Yeah, that too.
They have good quips and comments. They're engaged in the conversation enough to, I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's roll the tape back. Did you just hear that millennial move there? I said
What?
roll the tape back.
Yeah. Let's start. Oh. What's a tape? No, just kidding.
Welcome to Dwell on These Things, a podcast by Dwell Community Church in Columbus, Ohio, where we hear stories and examples of how God is moving in the church at Dwell and around the world.
Welcome to Dwell on These Things. I'm Pat Reeder, Director of Equipping here at Dwell Community Church. Today we'll be discussing what it's like to serve Gen Z. I'm here with Catherine Akers and Doug O'Malley, and why don't you guys just start by introducing yourselves, and tell us like what your role is here at Dwell, how long you've been on staff, and just kind of what sort of basic credentials you might have for commenting on Gen Z.
Sure. So I have been on staff at Dwell for 8 years now. I started when I was 18, actually. So I am the resident Gen Zer of this conversation today. And
personal experience.
Yes. So not only have I been serving Gen Z for that long, I was also joined this church when I was just starting high school. And I oversee the events that we plan for our high school and our college groups, so a large age range. And I also just recently started coaching leaders of middle school groups, so kind of overseeing almost the entire swath of Generation Z in our church in different ways.
Cool. Great. Doug?
Yeah, so I came on staff in 2017 and been here ever since. So right now I teach one of our high school central teachings, and I lead in a high school and college group. And when I went into a high school group in 2011, I did not expect to be there for longer than 2 years, and I'm still there. And
you couldn't get enough of Gen Z.
I know, yeah. I really got to see the shift there. But yeah, so I help oversee our high school ministry, and I coach some of the college home churches in our sphere, and I oversee one of our young adult groups. So yeah, similar to Catherine, kind of the whole array.
Cool. And also, you were mentioning to me that something when you did your master's degree. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my capstone project was on discipling high school students or discipling Gen Z, because those were the high school students at that time. And so yeah, I ended up getting to do a bunch of reading about different statistics about Gen Z, and did a lot of interviewing different leaders and things like that, and eventually ended up making a thesis out of it.
Awesome. Cool. I hope that comes to bear a little bit here this morning while we look at this. To get us started, generational cohorts are primarily a tool for sociologists and demographers. But of course, they kind of bleed into pop culture, into everyday language. But of course, once they bleed into pop culture and everyday language, they tend to take on a life of their own. So, you might find people saying things like, if they ever find someone that's irritating to them and young, that person's a millennial or they're Gen Z, depending on, how, aware of the terminology is. Or on the flip side, anyone who's old and frustrating gets called a boomer, even if they're, in their 40s. And so we probably need to get like some working definitions here. So the boomers come from the war, right? It's right after the war, born in roughly 1945 until 1965. This group entered adulthood in the 1970s and 1980s, right? And following that group was what we call Gen X. That group was born in roughly 1965 to 1982. And then you have the millennials. So Doug and I are the, local millennials. They were born in the period roughly 1982 to 1995, depending on who you ask. But some
Right.
people go later, right? And that's kind of important is that you get the lines blur at a certain point. But so these aren't super rigid. I think that's important for us to say. But roughly speaking, yeah, Gen X is 65 to 82, but you have people like on the edge. Millennials 82 to 95. Anyhow, the millennials are somewhat easy to understand because they have that name because they live their entire adult lives in the new millennium, right? So I'm a perfect example of this. I was born in 1982. I graduated college in 2000. Everything that I've experienced as an adult has happened with 20 in the front. And by and large, this group, their parents are boomers. Gen Z, the group that we're really focusing on today, was born in the late 1990s. And people see this finishing up around 2012, though, because some of these are developing, these sciences and how to really understand how a generational cohort operates and where this sort of, you might call cultural boundaries of a generation are. That this, they're throwing the number 2012, but I'm sure again there's some borderline cases. Again, by and large, the Gen Z's parents are from Gen X. Okay, so there's kind of this natural rhythm. Of course, there's exceptions, but this is sort of the basic shape that these different groups take. Sometimes even people use the expression cuspers for people who are born on the edge, and I count as someone like that. So people sometimes are like, actually earlier before we even started, Doug was like, "You're an Xer," and I was like, "Nope, technically a millennial, but yeah." In any case, you see a blurring of the lines. Let's start off with research and kind of what's out there in terms of like actual data, actual studies. Like, what are some of the distinctives that either of you guys have read or heard about Gen Z? Let's start with Doug.
So I think a lot of times when people want to talk about that kind of a question, it's easy to think of all of like the flaws and the weaknesses. And I generally just think it's helpful to remember that like every generation thinks the one after them is like
The worst.
just completely losing it. Yeah. And generally I think with making disciples, it's like the things that have worked for 2,000 years are still going to work.
Right. That's good.
And so we shouldn't like have like sociology get elevated above scripture or something like that. And I also think it's helpful to think of their strengths first. I mean, there's certainly things that drive me crazy of like, I think 6'7" is probably the mark of the beast, but in terms of like their strengths, they have like a thirst for justice.
Yeah.
Statistically, they are and they will be the most like racially diverse generation.
That's cool.
And I think that they also they love to pray. That's cool. That's something that like anecdotally I've seen. They really enjoy prayer. Like I like to pray too, and I think it's good. I think it's good for you, and I like that it works. But they really just enjoy praying. And I was surprised even that like the Barna group started to find data to back that up. Of like they started surveying them and asking, what are the things that matter the most to you about your like walk with God? What are the things that matter the most to you in your spiritual life? The top two had to do with prayer.
They did.
Yeah, can you actually clarify that a little bit? Are you talking about like private prayer, reading scripture, or are we talking like in groups, like or both? Yeah, tell me more about that. I've never heard that.
My general take is that the study didn't really delineate between the two, but anecdotally, I just think they really enjoy both. They love praying on their own. They really like to connect with God. They really value spiritual experiences, but they really love to pray in groups.
That's
sometimes you wish that they would pray publicly a little bit more. It's like, why do we bring you to this prayer meeting if you're not going to pray? But they really enjoy like being there and being a part of it.
That's cool.
That's funny. You say you have people you wish would pray more. We got people in our group. I'm like, you're praying for a long time. We're in a group right now.
Maybe a little less.
Maybe you can pray a little
Right,
less.
yeah, but they do love to pray. I'm looking right now, and the two highest values that they have as Christians are talking to God in prayer, but also learning how to pray, which is a big thing. I've noticed too that people say, Gen Z doesn't know how to learn. Their attention span isn't that great. They love to learn. It might not be in the same ways that we expect them to, hitting the books in the library or something like that, but they love to learn different things. And I think prayer is one of the highest goals that they have as Christians, at least Gen Z Christians, on what to learn.
Yeah, I'm sure some of that stuff about attention span is also a little bit exaggerated too.
Yeah.
I remember you and I, Doug, a while ago were arguing with someone who said that they couldn't handle more than like a 10 or 15 minute teaching. I was like, they're in high school.
Yeah.
They sit through at least an hour of class before a break.
Yeah.
I think they can handle, not that we should make it like impossibly long or boring, but like, come on. Like, they can handle, like they sit in class all day. Like, what are we talking about here?
If they're learning the periodic table and how to use the Pythagorean theorem, I think they can like follow a little bit of Romans.
Yeah, seriously. Absolutely. It's good. So, those are some of the statistical, generalities, we could say. But of course, you guys have personal experience, Catherine, you just look in the mirror and there it is. Just kidding. But tell us a little bit more. I'll start with you, Catherine.
Sure.
What have you seen? Like what's been your personal experience, and how does that interface with some of the stuff you see with Gen Z, or like some of the statistical information?
I think one of the buzzwords associated with Generation Z is authenticity, which what does that mean? They're saying that they value authenticity, but I think I have seen that in some ways, and sometimes in small ways. One thing I love about my generation is I'm wearing sweatpants right now. We can show up in sweatpants at work, and that's what it means to be authentically me, But I think that we see that in our ministries, that they love the home church model, that they can be in a smaller group and feel known. They love discipleship, that they can meet one-on-one with somebody. I have my girls show up to my house, and that's the real me, Laundry's not done, and we're trying to cook dinner and everything else. And I think I've seen that they really value that they want to be known, but they also want to know people who are like them and who are flawed like them. And I think it adds a lot to our ministry when we can kind of show them that authenticity is really out there, and they can have friendships in that way.
Yeah, actually, if I could draw you out a little more on that, how does that interact with the performative picture that exists on social media, like Instagram? So it's like,
yes.
I think when I think of people who fully understand the social media ecosystem, I mean, these are people who were 8 or 9 when the iPhone and when Twitter and Facebook, like this has been essentially their whole lives. So how does what you just said interact with that phenomenon? Right.
It really does interact closely. I mean, we were using these tools. I think I got Instagram in middle school before anybody knew how damaging they were going to be, especially to girls. And so, we grew up, trying to perform, trying to show people that we deserved likes and things like that. And I've always said this, to be successful in the high school ministry as a boy, you have to be athletic and good at sports. Yeah. And to be a girl, you have to not be insecure. You have to be confident in who you are. And I think that is because they don't want to be performing on social media for these people, but they don't really know any different way to try to reach out for connection. And so when we model authenticity in Christian community, they see that there's actually an alternative to having to please people in that way.
Sure. So it kind of comes out as almost a reaction to the overly curated, even dishonest picture presented on social media.
People will say that they don't like that social media is that way, but they don't know an alternative, so they're kind of stuck. Yeah.
Doug, do you have any thoughts on that, or just the question about your experience with Gen Z?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. It's interesting because I'm like we've found that they're so spiritually receptive. Like we see that across the country with all the revivals. We've seen that in our own church with all the students coming to Christ. And I think that social media certainly has a stranglehold over a lot of people. I think especially like women, I think it really like can crush them. But I do think that one of the things that God's used for good out of it is I think it has woken people up to how broken the world is. I was talking with some guys in my high school group and my college group about like, what is it about the gospel that's so appealing? And one of the things they were saying is like, we have so much information now at our fingertips about everything that's happening in the world. And in some ways, it seems like you were promised that, like, the more, honestly, it sounded like Ecclesiastes of, like, there's nothing new under the sun. I looked for wisdom and it was all vanity. The more I learned, the more grief I had. They're just like, the more you learn about how broken the world is, the more you're looking for an answer of, like, why is it that way? And is someone going to come and fix it?
Yeah.
And so I think that, like, it, in some ways it, like, hurts people, but I think it also, like, wakes people up of, like, there's got to be an answer for some of those things.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. I don't know, Catherine, I guess I don't know how much you experience this, but Doug, you might have with what you might call sort of a techno-futurism of the millennial generation. So I remember in the 90s people being like, the internet is going to be amazing. It's the information superhighway. It's a library. It's all these positive things. And of course, at the exact moment that they were saying this, one of the highest grossing things on the web was pornography. So it's like there's some naivete there, and so all these, and that was just the web and PCs, and then of course you throw in social media, you throw in iPhones, and so there's a sense in which Gen Z seems to have caught a sort of like down wave in terms of people's views of technology in the way that millennials kind of were on an up wave. And so, like that I think that there's, so I'm just curious, like, do you see that? Like you just mentioned like this negativity or like, maybe an awareness, like a sensitivity that things aren't working. But, there was kind of this odd, my experience as a millennial was even when things were going wrong, there was still this sort of strange optimism, especially about technology. And I was curious, was that your experience? And anyhow, speak to that if you can.
I mean, I think like you definitely got a lot of the messaging of like technology is the key, like technology is the future. One of the things that's interesting when I like talk to some of the students now is they feel kind of disenchanted. Well, one, they definitely seem aware of like I'm not proud of my screen time or something like that.
Okay.
But then the other thing is I think they feel a bit disenchanted by it.
Yeah.
Because they're like, it's this moving target of trying to keep up with all of these trends and it's exhausting. Right. And the gospel's really appealing then because then it's like a release from that, a release from the pressure.
Right.
And then they're also like, technology is supposed to make my life easier, but technology is taking all my jobs.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if you have anything you'd
I was just going to say that lines up with what the data is saying, that over half of them agree that they wish they spent less time online.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, and I think that's helpful too, that specifically like that kind of demographic information is helpful because I think sometimes it's just out there that like Gen Z, they're stuck on their phones and like that's just, they love it. And, I just think there's a naive or kind of a dishonest presentation of like, ooh, the Gen Z, they're digital natives. And, it's like in some ways that's cool because it means they're fluent, if you could call it that, in the use of technology. But the fact that many of them are saying like, I kind of would like to dial this back, and they seem conscientious. That's anyhow. You wanted to say more on?
Yeah, I think that they do have a critique on it, and they do. Over half of them say that in-person relationships, 54% agree that those are more valuable than online relationships.
That's cool.
So,
how has reaching students changed with seeing this kind of generational turn? Doug, you said that you started doing high school ministry with millennials. You graduated in 2010, right? So this is like you were dealing with people not too much younger than you, people who are still millennials, and then you, through that time, you're still working with high school students. So switched over to Gen Z. Like, what are some differences that you observed in terms of the Christian work and the types of like tools that were necessary for that?
Yeah, I think there's like a pendulum, I feel like, where, so when I was a student in our high school ministry, I remember noticing that all of our groups were really guy heavy. But then, but then all the boys discovered porn and video games, and the pendulum really swung the other way. Where you have high school groups of like 4 or 5 boys and then just a bunch of girls. And then I felt like maybe in conjunction with like probably a lot of factors, but like the mental health crisis and stuff,
Yeah.
it's certainly swung back the other way where like in our college ministry, you might have a home church with 2 guys ministry houses of guys
Yeah.
that just all live together. And then you might have a girls' house that has the 1 or 2 single girls from 2 or 3 different home churches living together.
Wow.
Right.
So you're seeing kind of a pendulum swing, and there's a gender element to that.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. And
Yeah, older Gen Z women are struggling the most with their mental health in the generation, and I would guess maybe even among the entire population. I haven't done a lot of reading about the older generations, but yeah.
that has been your personal experience.
That's what the data is showing. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're more depressed. They're more focused on how they can please other people. They feel, more anxiety related to their career and their future.
Interesting. Do you think, from someone on the inside,
I know. That's like
what
my
has-
exact age range. I was like, dang, we're not doing good out
you're
here.
at, what do you think is driving that? Like, what's yeah?
I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I don't feel super confident in my answer. I think we're still trying to discover what is driving that anxiety and that depression. I mean, I shared earlier that we started off with social media just completely uninhibited, and
Yeah.
I think that plays a part. I think we have a lot more opportunities now as women, but that's also causes a lot of pressure to live up to that expectation.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's the pressure to do it on your own, the individuality that pushes people away from opportunities like Christian community, because I shouldn't need that. I shouldn't need other people. I should be able to do this on my own.
You're weak if you need community.
I see women living on their own more often just because they want to feel that sense of independence, but it often leads to a sense of loneliness too.
Yeah, I think what you're describing too is borne out by reading I've done as well. Like, Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation talks a lot about some of the negative impact on this generation, but especially women, and specifically the role that social media plays in that. And, the data is harrowing, absolutely troubling, just
Right.
the way that the spikes in mental health. Men are struggling too, maybe with different things, like you said, pornography or heavy-duty video games. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if a heavy share of what you just described was having a large portion of your childhood and formative years being shaped and structured by tech corporations that have zero interest in your well-being, except and primarily, and their primary interest in you is engagement in their platform and increasing their profits.
Right.
And so, you're
Yeah.
about to say something, please.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say that's why, we take discipleship seriously, especially as women in this age demographic. And I'm discipling 3 women who are close to my age. They're within that 18 to 24 age range of struggling women. And man, I've shared that with all of them because I want them to know that the women that they're interacting with day in and day out probably are fitting into some of these categories. And they're convinced that Christ is real and that his message can change people's lives. So it really adds fuel to the fire to say, and God has placed you around so many women who need that, and you are the outlier that you have that, so.
Yeah, I think that's right. Sometimes, Paul in Philippians talks about, like, I think it's Philippians 2, where he describes Christians as being like stars in the night sky. There's this picture of darkness, and, the stars are these little bright spots. And
That's a great point.
there is a sense as things become darker, or as more people are suffering or feeling like they don't have meaning, or at least to the extent that they do have meaning, it's defined entirely on this constructed identity that's online. And of course, they sense that that's not enough, and that's not really what they're made for. That's going to make people who don't operate that way
Right.
stand out.
One thing I was thinking, Catherine, you mentioned like the differentiating like older and younger Gen Z. That's something I've definitely noticed anecdotally, And I was surprised that Gen Z is now old enough that the Barna group differentiates between the two. But I'm like, I definitely think that with some of the younger ones, there is like both men and women, there's like an enhanced spiritual receptivity. I was not surprised that there are now like fewer people that think that in Gen Z that think that like what's true changes over time.
Yeah.
That really lines up a lot with what we see in our ministry. Like I don't really remember the last time that we had a hardcore dogmatic postmodern relativist come out to one of our groups. And I even think you'd mentioned earlier about like data and stuff and how that interfaces with what we see. One thing I was surprised by is I was actually really surprised when Barna said that 1 in 5 of the Gen Z people they interviewed identified as something other than LGBT. Because I do not see that in not just like our church kids, but like in like the non-Christians that come out to our high school groups and college groups over the last couple of years. They are not as into that stuff.
Interesting. So you're saying that the data countrywide suggests that 1 in 5 members of Gen Z identify as one of the cluster of, LGBTQ, right? Gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, right? The letters. And so but you're saying in your personal experience, that's not what you're seeing in Columbus, Ohio,
which is a super liberal city.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
No, that's totally what I'm saying. Like, there's probably a lot of reasons why that might be. One Gospel Coalition article said something to the effect of, you can tell someone the sky is purple and they'll play along for a bit, but eventually they're going to be like, come on, man, it's blue. Yeah. And I think for some of like the high schoolers in particular, I think they all are definitely like, you should not hate people regardless of what they identify as, but they definitely seem to have a little bit more of like an eye roll attitude towards it of like, I'm kind of sick of having some of this stuff, like identity stuff shoved down my throat.
Yeah. I think 10 years ago when The Coddling of the American Mind came out, which I think that was 10 years ago, was it not?
Roughly 2018 is when it was
2018.
written. I think an original article came out in like 2015 in the Atlantic, but yeah.
So people were talking a lot about safetyism and, words that you couldn't say, and people were afraid to speak out and share their opinion. I definitely think that that's changed a lot. I mean, we saw that in the data that a lot less people were answering like, I don't know, or I don't want to say. They're like, here's my opinion. I'm going to say it. I don't hate anybody who has a different opinion. I'll talk to them. But, there's a much less neutral zone of people being afraid to share what they think. They're pretty opinionated.
Way less politically correct.
Yeah.
Yes, that too. You can see that in the TikTok memes and everything else.
For sure.
Some of that makes sense. Youth culture often is shaped around, like where is the profane, if you could call it that. Like what's sacred, what's profane, and what is sacred, which for, a good 10 or 15 years has been certain identities like gender and sexual identity, racial identities, and you can imagine that some of these sacred things could become profane for that young group. Like they're going to go after that, and if they feel like they're being like bound by certain speech conduct or whatever it may be, that's ripe for being rebelled against.
And they do.
Yeah, right. That's interesting, and I think that sort of is probably a surprise for someone like me, on the older millennial side, sort of like, oh, Gen Z is just like this, and then to hear, no, they might actually be kind of comfortable with being offensive is kind of surprising, because it's like, well, these guys are surrounded by this. This is just what they're going to believe, and it's like, no, actually, they're kind of like bucking. Actually, I'm curious if you guys could comment, maybe this comes up with the authenticity, so there is a way in which what we were just talking about, there's a kind of, Phariseeism to political correctness.
Yes.
And that, that there's rules, and if you break the rules, you're in trouble. You might be canceled, you might be ostracized, whatever you want to call it, whatever that form takes, that there's rules and then there's punishments for breaking the rules. and that some of those like political correctness issues, or just kind of what you might call identity politics, is something that this group has been surrounded by. And I'm curious, so you can see that kind of being it's their legalism. Maybe they didn't have like a church culture that was like, here's how you have to live, Sunday morning we do this, make sure you follow the 10 Commandments, make sure, when you get older, don't smoke, don't drink, whatever it is, you can kind of have a caricature of that. For Gen Z, it seems like the rules heavy and the sort of Pharisaical mindset came in the form of secular political correctness. So I was wondering if you guys could comment on, like, have you observed an attraction to the grace picture, to the idea that your life, that Christ, essentially just that, like, what Christ offers in his life and in his death, and kind of the way that he combats Phariseeism and the way in which he offers salvation as a gift, not by, because really in the Pharisee model, salvation equals following the rules, and it's like Christ offers salvation for free.
Idea.
I have a couple thoughts. I don't know if this is exactly answering your question, but they pertain to the idea of, like, what do they find appealing about the gospel?
Sure.
I think one that maybe ties in a little bit more directly is, I think they really love the simplicity of it. And this is sort of where it's like, there's things that have always been true of people, like the love of just like the simplicity of grace. But there's so many like if you grow up in maybe like a Catholic or more formal church, there's so many convoluted doctrines, or like there's so many like buzzwords flying around social media about the key to fulfillment of, like, you have to like manifest and like all this other stuff. And a number of them recently have been like, there's just something really appealing about just the simplicity of it, of like, no, God just loves you and you're messed up and he died for you.
Yeah.
And it's almost like I don't know how many of them, like the younger ones, know what Occam's razor is, but it's almost kind of like that, of like, that's like pretty straightforward and pretty easy to track. And so I think they like that. And I also think that because they have access to so much information, there's so many different opinions, like from people sometimes that really care about them, that they're close to, and sometimes from whatever influencer of the day or YouTuber they want to watch. There's so many different opinions telling them, like, here's what you need to do this. Here's how you need to, like, actualize your goals and all this stuff. And they were
How
like,
to be a millionaire by 25.
Yeah, for sure. I think they find the relief from the pressure really appealing. Like where Jesus is like, my yoke's easy, my burden's light. I think that's really appealing to them.
Well, yeah, with with political correctness, it's just like you feel like you're walking in a minefield. You don't know what part of the ground is going to explode. Things that were once considered, relatively fair game are suddenly like shocking. You could get in a lot of trouble for even offering a scientific opinion on that. So I think, you could see that fear of the minefield. And you it's interesting you mentioned Occam's razor. Obviously maybe they're not mentioning, they're not speaking in those terms, but there's even an explanatory simplicity. If the morals of the day are constantly shifting and there's a kind of overwhelming complexity to that, the simplicity of the gospel has a very it's clean. It's a very straightforward presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think when it's paired with Christian community, that they actually get to see that lived out and experience it, that makes a really big difference too. Because despite how simple grace in the gospel can be, I feel like it can still take somebody, hearing it 8, 10,
For
12
sure.
times over and over again to understand, oh, God really does love me like that. But I think one thing that aids that understanding is interacting with people who do love them and accept them when they do make a mistake or they say something totally crazy or, their mental health gets the best of them and they do something hurtful and they see somebody actually receive them.
Yeah.
That shows, oh, this love for me is actually real.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I've been walking with God in some regard for almost 30 years at this point, and I'm still trying to make sense of the gospel.
Yep.
And I don't mean that I don't understand the words, but it's like there's such an ingrained performance element, whether
Right.
that's a human element, probably. It definitely is an American element. I think that there's kind of the hustle concept is very natural. It's sort of part of our experience. And yeah, I'm reading this book right now. And it's called The Secret Place of Thunder. And I'm going to admit that's kind of a corny title, but I was actually like finding myself convicted about it. Like, oh yeah, like he's talking a lot about performance and how you have to work. And it's like living in Christian community, making mistakes and realizing that people are still there with you. They may not be like, oh, I'm so glad you blew it on that thing, but they love you still, they accept you still, and they're you're still part of the family, so to speak.
And some of the most convinced Christians that I know have an experience like that in their past, where they really messed up and somebody received them back because of Christ's grace. And yeah, I think that's a time in our ministry when we tend to lose a lot of students, when they feel that shame and they feel like they can't come back. But for the ones who do, who take that risk and, they might experience rejection, but they take that risk and they come back to Christian community, they're usually more convinced than ever.
I think that's a very interesting observation. And in a broader environment, like we're saying, where even if they have not personally experienced being canceled or whatever, and if you're in a broader environment where you feel like I have no idea where the like what I could do that would basically irredeemably destroy my life, just even knowing that's out there can be really threatening. And this might happen. Maybe you guys could just briefly. My experience is primarily with millennials and people getting canceled in their jobs, that kind of thing, like stuff that's happened in, I don't know, the last decade or so. I wonder if either of you guys could comment, just maybe for kind of understanding the Gen Z cohort and their mindset, like, what does this look like in high school? Like, what is, quote, canceling? You're not going to get canceled.
That's a good question.
Like, people aren't, there's only some limited way in which you can be deplatformed when you're 15. You're not a writer, you're not a professor, it's like,
right.
So, but there's ways that this probably is experienced at the level of the high school. So have you seen stuff like that?
I think, Catherine, you should take this one, because my immediate thought is if anyone spent time with my high school group for 5 minutes, they would all be canceled.
Right.
So maybe you should take this one.
Oh my goodness. Okay, here's something I guess sacred to Generation Z is the group chat. And if you get kicked from the group chat, that would be a way to be deplatformed, I guess,
sting.
in terms of your friend group. Yeah, I mean, they're online so much, being blocked, or apparently there's a difference between being unadded versus being blocked on Snapchat. One of my high schoolers was explaining that to me yesterday.
That's so deep.
I know. I'm one of the older Gen Z. I'm like, what do you mean? But I think that's a big way, being socially isolated from your friends, especially on your screen. I mean, there's no way to really reconcile if somebody blocks you, right? So I think that's a big fear that people have, social isolation and stuff like that.
I feel like now that I'm thinking about it and you're talking and getting me thinking about it a little bit more, I think like one of the biggest values is like loyalty. And so if you do something that's perceived as like a betrayal of trust or like disloyal in some way, then I think that gets you booted from the group chat.
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny. I've never been removed from a group chat before, but I'm also mainly dealing with like boomers and millennials. So,
Yeah, right.
They don't know how to
They
do
don't know
it.
how.
Yeah, they don't know. Yeah, the tech is too advanced.
That's funny.
They might have to call the IT department or something. Earlier, you guys have already kind of commented somewhat on this about the effect that home churches might have in benefiting Gen Z, or even the role that a ministry house could play. I'd like it if either of you could comment on potential benefits, but also maybe costs or like things about these ways of doing ministry or ways of organizing communities that might even be unattractive or create obstacles for Gen Z.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about authenticity earlier. There's really nothing more authentic than living with another person. You can't hide what you're
see
really
everything.
like, what your weird tics are, things like that. And so I think that that is something that, again, Gen Z really values is authenticity, but also fears, right? You
Okay.
can't hide behind a screen when you're, bunking with a roommate or something like that. So I think that's an example where it kind of hits on both things. It's what they really want, but simultaneously they're too afraid to enter into the risk that that would afford them.
That's interesting. It kind of reminds me of, a millennial thing, which is like, and I suspect could be a Gen Z thing, but there's many of them are still on the younger side, is just the way that people really like want things like marriage, but they're scared of the cost, the commitment, the lift that it's going to be. And it makes you wonder if this is like you're seeing kind of a form of that as well in living with other people. That's an interesting thing. That's sort of like the double-edged blade or sword of authenticity.
You asked about ministry houses specifically.
And if you have thoughts on home churches, let me know too.
Yeah, I mean, I think with ministry houses, so how earlier I said, like, man, like this next generation, like you have to avoid that. Like this next generation, like these kids are all, like their priorities are all messed up, something like that. I think with this next generation, no, I mean, everyone always said the millennials that like we were all like materialists and that kind of thing. And that was probably true. But I think that like one of the things I've noticed with Gen Z in terms of getting them to want to move into a ministry house is that them wanting their personal space is a lot more of a holdup. Like I felt like when I was in college and we were talking to like a guy, for instance, about like, what do you think about moving in with us? It's a great way to grow with God. Like you can live in community. Grunge was maybe a little bit more in.
I know what you're talking about.
And so I feel like now there's a little bit more of like a reticence of like, well, the idea of like really packing it in isn't as appealing.
Right. Yeah. And, kids used to love sleeping over, right? The idea of a sleepover. And now it's like, we actually had somebody recently, he didn't spend the night at the ministry house because he didn't know where to plug in his phone charger. That was his reason.
Unsolvable.
Do you think so here's a funny question. I mean, obviously someone might throw that out as like a BS excuse, but do you think he was actually afraid?
I think people seriously want to know that they can scroll on their phone until they fall asleep. I mean,
wow.
How else could you go to sleep,
Yeah, like if someone said that to me, I'd be like,
you don't really want to
joking?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, look, just tell me you don't want to come over. And it's like, no, I actually just want a three-prong plug.
Yes.
Okay, but to be honest, I think that exact response is sometimes exactly what's needed. And I think that sometimes people are really afraid of giving that because they don't want to be offensive. And sometimes I do think that's what you need.
Yeah, just like, come on.
Yeah.
Of course we have outlets.
Yeah, and I've had people come back and thank me for saying something like that. Of like, man, I was being kind of stupid there. Like that was really fun that we ended up doing that thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. So part of it is there's kind of I've heard this in general. There's a risk aversion to Gen Z. That there's a lot of anxiety. And of course, Haidt called it the anxious generation.
Right.
And of course, he was focusing really on the impact of technology. But I do think people have described the way that millennials are a little bit more, action-oriented, more materialistic, as you put it, more heedless of caution. Unfortunately, like a key figure in the millennials would be like a Mark Zuckerberg, who's, many, many billions of dollars at this point and is only a couple of years younger than me.
Wow.
And it's like this guy, like their motto when they started Facebook was, move fast and break things. It's like, and I think that kind of, race and just, whatever goes, we don't care what the past has brought us and we're going to try to move forward. But I sense you guys, it sounds like you're saying too that you've seen a kind of like hesitation and like where I'm not going to run into that quite as quickly.
Yeah. I think people are afraid of commitment in relationships, but also with jobs. I mean, I see that changing, for example, in like the 9-to-5 workday, that Gen Z are like, I don't want to do that. I want to work just enough so I have enough time and money to play, So it's that their values are changing, maybe away from, I'm going to run as hard and as fast as I can towards success, but I want to be able to create a comfortable life for myself, and that's where my energy is going towards.
Yeah, so it's like, so part of it's a values thing. It's not just
Yeah.
you see that like countries or groups or countries, cultures, they kind of have a temperament, and like kind of saying that like the millennial kind of has a type A temperament, and maybe that like Gen Z has a little bit more of a type B temperament. Like,
Yeah, and I think people would look at them and say, oh, they're lazy or they're afraid that they're not running as hard and as fast as we did. But Gen Z would say, well, we don't even want to be doing that.
yeah. Why are you wearing skinny jeans? Like,
That's so uncomfortable. Why wouldn't you just...
I'd rather wear sweats
Yeah, and
or like gigantic, I don't know. We saw these in high school, the Jinko jeans that were like 38 inches at the bottom. It's like, how is that even possible?
Yeah,
but there's
I think
parallels
it's
now.
a work smarter, not harder mentality that I think they've adopted.
I have a thought that ties into it's something kind of you're asking about, like what's appealing about the community, and also it goes back a little bit to like we are starting to see more men than women, maybe for the first time ever in the American church. And I was like asking a few of the guys in our home church who've like come to Christ in the last year or so, like, why do you think that is? Like when you look out at like your friend group, like why do you think that like the guys are more interested? And one of the things he said that was interesting was like, well, we're told that we need to prioritize like our mental health. We need to talk about deeper things more. There's definitely like an awareness of the need, but there's not really like viable spaces to do that. Like if I were to like turn to like a friend of mine and start talking about how I've been like feeling depressed or my emotional life or something like that, most of my friends would be like, what are you doing here?
I'm trying to watch a game.
Yeah, but I know that like a community like our home church is a place where like deeper conversations will happen, and so that's appealing. What I don't fully know is why that wouldn't necessarily be the same for women. But he was like, for men, that's definitely like a pull to this.
Clear, there's like an obvious venue to have real relationships, to have closer connection. You're not going to be shunned for being honest. That's cool. Yeah, and I think I've heard too that men are, this is kind of like what's going on with like Jordan Peterson stuff. It's like I think men have felt kind of like aimless, and I think kind of like the idea of having structure and having some kind of like like a community that cares about you and is willing to like check up on you. Yeah, there's definitely something happening with Gen Z that's very different than what was going on with millennials.
One thing, I know that this is more about like Gen Z, but in terms of the younger Gen Z and then sort of the one after them, Gen Alpha, I felt like one of the things that is probably going to happen next is like, I felt like with Gen Z for a while, it was like, we have to teach them that like, it is okay to disagree and it is okay to like think that someone is wrong in what they want to do. I think that we're going maybe to have to swing the other way where it's like a lot of people are being raised sort of with like the, I guess I'm on a podcast, but like the podcast bro mentality of like, you look at the people who disagree with you in like a condescending kind of like, I actually do think less of you or something like that. And so that's just a prediction, but I could see that kind of slant. If like the freshmen in my group or sophomores, any indicator of that, I think that might be where things are tilting a bit.
Yeah, it seems like who's doing the canceling might be switching, but it seems like people are still pretty dedicated to like, what you said offends me and I'm going to like destroy you. And it's like, maybe like we'll have a conversation, but it seems like there's still kind of like an outer limit. Like if you say something that's really liberal in the in the manosphere, like you might get like roasted and destroyed over that. And it's like, I thought we were actually trying to have genuine conversations here where we're like sorting through ideas. And if I'm going to be scorned and mocked here as well, like that's not actually an advancement. It just means that the sort of like the people canceling have just like switched sides, or like who's really or who has the power to cancel. And I think that's kind of ugly in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's, I guess, to put it more bluntly, I think what I was trying to say is like, I think we're starting to see maybe more kids who are alt-right than kids with like blue hair.
I think I see what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Right. So you're seeing a lot of people be maybe tilting conservative, Donald Trump winning a second time. And actually there's all this, surprising interest in Christianity right now.
Yeah.
Specifically as we were talking about a moment ago with like young men, Gen Z men being drawn to Christianity, and we talked a little bit about that. But there's not a identical interest coming from women. I'm curious where what is behind that, or if we have any at least initial thoughts, because this is still fairly new information.
Yeah. I think Christianity is still associated strongly with conservatism, and I haven't done a ton of research into the political field in terms of if women are becoming more conservative than they were before, but I would assume not as much. So I think the fact that Christianity is associated with those ideas, most women aren't interested in that, especially when you talk about things like, the fact that Christians tend to be pro-life. I don't think that that's something that a lot of women would say that they want to adhere to. And so they're not even interested necessarily in checking out a church or maybe even associating with a woman who claims to be a Christian, because they have these views that I think are peripheral, of course, to the message of Jesus, but unfortunately it gets tied together.
One thing that I'm kind of curious about, too, is, so from what I understand, one of the best predictors of someone's political position right now is education, at least the last I heard. And it's my understanding that women are overtaking men significantly in university areas, like in terms of their performance and then even career.
Right.
And I wonder to what extent that demographic shift is also playing a part here.
I think so. I mean, I feel like it's a little bit of a joke, like women in STEM, have you heard that?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay. Like,
hit us.
A girl does something like cool, competent. It's like women in STEM, we can do this too.
Yeah.
That's kind of the, that's how women feel, is we're finally being considered for, these higher roles in companies and education, and we want that. I mean, the women who come out to my home church, especially my college group, are so competent. I mean, we had a woman come out. She's in her early 20s, and she just ran a 50-mile race. Mm-hmm. She ran for 50 miles. I'm like, oh, my God. You are a hard worker. She's put together. She's in school. And, you talk to them, and a lot of them really want to be in the medical field. They have purpose. They have drive. They're super smart. And I think they see the Christian lifestyle as maybe kind of motherly, kind of nurturing.
Interesting.
Well, I was thinking too, like, based off of that, it's like, it's one thing to like ask the like 23-year-old in our college home church, like, what if you moved around your schedule at Kroger so that you could come to fellowship more? And it's another thing to like ask the like woman who's studying to be a doctor, like, come on, it's not that important. Like, like come to this. So there's maybe more to lose in that regard.
Yeah, and for a lot of them, they've been putting like stake into this career, maybe even since they were 14 or 15. I mean, a lot of our high school girls, they're already STNAs in the hospital. They're working towards something, and they see sometimes fellowship meetings or even putting in daily time with God as getting in the way of studying. And, who's to say that studying's a bad thing? It's obviously not.
As somebody with multiple advanced degrees, I think studying is great.
Right.
But I think what you're getting at is actually really important. When you invite somebody and the alternative is whatever, like they're just like screwing around on their phone or watching like a show they don't even like on Netflix, that's not a hard ask.
Right.
But, Jesus does call us to a certain kind of lifestyle. He talks about us losing our lives to gain it, and that the one who tries to gain their life will lose it. I mean, if you've got a pretty darn good life, or that there's a sense that your goals are within reach, that's a big call, And I think that Yeah, like in other words, like there's probably people who follow Christ. By following Christ, their lives unambiguously improve. There are other people who, because they believe it's true, have to make surrenders and hard decisions. That means leaving behind a great, like maybe very high-paying job or some other kind of like accolades. And maybe at least one thing you're saying here is that women are in that camp and men are less so, or at least the sense is, the broader cultural sense is that that women and men are splitting apart on these issues.
Yeah.
I'm actually curious with, this is sort of like we joked about this earlier, but like, is it your impression that people's attention spans are actually short? Like, is it really shorter? Like we joked about that earlier, and then the other one is, okay, so it is okay.
Yeah, my answer to that is, if you're a Gen Zer listening right now, what else are you doing?
Yeah,
right.
You're made it so far. Good for you.
Yeah, right. I'm actually impressed. And they're probably watching TV and doing the dishes and something else, driving at the same time.
In some ways, that's probably good. Hey, like there's some kinds of multitasking that are good. I guess if you're like also trying to write a paper for school or whatever, like I don't know if I would recommend that. There are certain types of things you can combine. Yeah, like I like to listen to audiobooks when I do the dishes and stuff. But okay, so you see Gen Zs. That's interesting. So your experience has been they really have. So here's another question. Is it just Gen Z? Or is it because all of us?
It's not the millennials because it's not us. But yeah, Gen Z for sure.
Wow, I don't know about that. Let's compare screen time, Doug. Let's see.
Yeah, I think. To what extent has this created obstacles to doing Christian work?
I feel like it has changed the way we think about preaching somewhat. I think sometimes people can change it too much and they start to become gimmicky and they want to be just as entertaining as TikTok, and you're not a multi-million-dollar company, so you're not going to be that. You're a 19-year-old who's taught the Bible one time, right?
Right.
But it does change the way we think about teaching, that we do want to be engaging, and I don't know, you teach RCT, I'm sure you have thoughts on that, but...
Yeah. I think I fully agree with the thing about like it changes it, but you can't be gimmicky.
Yes.
that spoke to my soul. But I think like it's changed the way we preach. I think also it's like it's made a lot more of an emphasis on like you have to be very clear, which has always been true of preaching. Like clarity is helpful, but I think that since you have less and less students coming through who like read for fun or like read well, I don't think you can take it for as much of a given that like they're going to follow your thought process. And I think there's like an art to doing that without it seeming like condescending. But I think like making sure that like your thought flow is like very clear, I think is like helpful.
Yeah, we don't need to create needless obstacles to people hearing or understanding the gospel. It's funny because I think, even Jesus used speaking techniques. Like if you read Jesus's sermons, a lot of them are formatted, you could say. Like especially if you look at the Beatitudes, it's like it's repetitive. And I think that's to help with memory. And so, that was the specific thing he was trying to deal with, is like, okay, he had a different technology problem. No one had books. He's like, I'm going to say this, and then I need you to remember it.
Right.
We have a different technology problem. We have tons and tons of technology constantly coming at us. But the point being that, like, being comfortable with the fact that we are aware of the fact that the culture that we're interacting with has certain obstacles or, barriers to understanding, and working with that. I like what you said. I mean, again, Doug affirms too, is we don't want to be gimmicky. We need to hold forth the gospel clearly. If you look at like what Paul says in 1 Corinthians, where he's talking about like, he's interacting with a group that kind of had certain expectations of speakers. You know, they're thinking about like the sophists, the Greek sophists, that they should be able to like speak really eloquently, and that's how things need to be presented. But he's like, you know, I came and just preached Christ crucified. Like, you know, that there is a level where like we need, even though it's appropriate to be sensitized to format, at the end of the day, we're really looking for the Holy Spirit to do its work. We're really looking to see the gospel itself as a message, not just in the like, you know, the garb that we drape it in is going to like have an effect on people. And that you know, that, and that's true of any age, you know, like it's, you know, it's whether, even though TikTok of course is kind of silly and like only a certain amount. I mean, people like my parents were the TV generation, you know, it's like they were seeing half an hour episodes like that was shaping their expectations. So it's not like any of this is new. It's just, it's a different new.
Yeah. And for those who want to learn, they will learn. Like they will overcome the challenges, the distractions in their own minds. Like I was even thinking, I heard recently you're teaching in October for the Halloween party. It was kind of short. And one of the girls in my friends group was like, I want him to keep going. Can he keep going? You know, and they can do longer format stuff if they're interested in the content, if they know how it applies to their lives. And I haven't really seen that be an issue.
I totally agree with that. I think that, so I felt like in the first couple of years after COVID, there definitely was like I felt this myself when I was listening to teachings. If our CT teachers went for the same length as they did before COVID, I'd be like, what is wrong with this guy? Like,
He's crazy.
and so I felt like for the first couple of years after that, yeah, definitely there was a lot more like, you really got to keep this going. I felt like in the last year or so, like a lot of our students really have like been able to track better.
Yeah.
They want more in-depth stuff.
They're rebuilding some muscles.
I think so.
They're even like in conversation, like they're more verbal, like they're more conversational.
They're funnier.
Yeah, that too.
They have good quips and comments. They're engaged in the conversation enough to, I don't know.
Yeah, and I was even thinking like just biblically, like we're told that like we're supposed to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, and I think part of that, like, it's like God will transform their minds, but also like neuroplasticity is a thing. And so he can transform their brains and help them regain that. And sometimes I think not as much like maybe in our preaching, but in our like discipleship with the attention span stuff, we have to be willing to call people towards some of those things. Like I've seen studies before about how like maybe since the pandemic aggravated some of these things of like 18-year-olds are kind of like what 15-year-olds used to be, maturity-wise. Or like 15, 16-year-olds are like 12-year-olds, and then like incoming freshmen are like kind of where like sixth graders used to be. And I think there might be some truth to that, but I think that like part of your job, if you're like discipling these students, is to like call them forward.
Yeah.
And so like I had a conversation a couple of months ago with a guy who's he's about 16, and like me and his dad, it was loving, but one of the things that we communicated was like, Paul talks about when I was a kid, I reasoned like a kid, but now that I've become a man, I've like done away with childish things. And it's like, you're 2 years away from being an adult and you reason like a child. And so you need to grow up a little bit in your thinking.
Yeah.
And he's like, so far he's responded really well to that. But I think that like, if you're like discipling a high schooler, sometimes you just have to level with them of like, you're getting closer and closer to being an adult. And so you need to like, you kind of need to like, jump up a couple levels here.
Yeah. I feel like the same conversations have been necessary with college people as well. People who experienced the pandemic during high school, I think, missed some formative years of maturity. And especially when it comes to people's functional lives, like being able to actually help them to succeed in school and to keep a job even when it gets difficult. And yeah, I think that's been necessary across a lot of different ages.
Yeah, I like what you guys are saying too about that this is learnable. You know, I think that gives people agency. You know, I think that if they're taught that like, you know, this is just too hard and you can't do it, that they'll internalize that. But if you're like, okay, hey, you're not where you need to be, but we can work to get you there. You know, like this isn't impossible. It's like, you know, thinking just about I don't know, like sports training. Like, hey,
Right.
you need to, we need to do a little bit more leg.
Yeah.
We need to put more weight on the legs,
Yeah.
and it's going to hurt, but it'll be, you'll be stronger on the other side.
Yeah, and if you just feed your brain a steady diet of TikTok and Mr. Beast, then like you shouldn't be
Right.
surprised if like your
Yep.
capacity for higher level thinking isn't just
Right.
magically developing.
Yeah, that's a topic of conversation in my discipleship time. Well, did you brain rot this week? Do you think that could have had an impact on your time with God, on your relationship with your roommates, things like that? Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's wow. It's funny. I mean, like I said, there's new things are in a strict sense new, right? In that you've got these things in your pocket that you carry with you everywhere. But even when I lived in a ministry house over 20 years ago, it's like people had video games.
Right.
Like there were guys who maybe didn't play video games, but man, the amount that they would just watch television, like it was astonishing. Like they would sit in front of they'd come home from work and be in front of the television until
They're
they went
cultured,
to bed.
Pat. They're men of culture.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Television is a very, very a subtle art.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate a lot of the stuff you guys have been saying as we've talked here, and I just want to start to wrap up with the following question. Let's project this out 20 years, 30 years. What are some of the things that Gen Z brings to the table that could really, what would make them really fantastic Christian leaders? They are going to be leading. Our home churches are going to be led by the Catherines of the world in 20 years, God willing. And so, what are the what do we think that's going to look like? What are the strengths that they'll bring? Just comment on that, please.
I mean, we've talked a little bit about this, but just how much they love authenticity and community. And I think that the communities that Gen Z is going to create into adulthood are going to be amazing. I mean, they love to be together, especially post-pandemic. I think people are starting to wake up to the reality that this is how life is supposed to be lived. It's supposed to be lived together. And I think we just keep seeing our communities improve and get better. So I'm excited to see what they're going to be like, even as parents as well, and creating those communities in the home. And I don't know. I think that's one of the biggest things that they bring to the table.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts are more in terms of like our specific church. Like I think there's some stuff that's like general of like, I think as people's families become more and more fractured, I think it'll like stand out a lot more to the lost world when they see a healthy one. But I think in terms of our church, I think that we've really done really well with winning students to Christ, and we've done really well with winning like college students to Christ and like becoming disciples of Jesus. But I feel like there's been a couple like ministry areas where we haven't fully been able to like get that down as much. I think that since they're the most racially diverse generation, I think they might be the ones in our church that really start to succeed in a higher percentage in terms of winning disciples out of the inner city.
Oh wow, that would be amazing.
So I think that would be like something that I would hope to see at least. And then the other one is I think that the world to Gen Z is a lot smaller because of like technology and things like that. And the other thing that we haven't really been able to crack in our church is like planting in other cities, like extra local church planting. And I could definitely see them doing well with that.
Yeah, tell me what you mean by the world's a little bit smaller.
Well, I mean, they can, if they work remotely, they can keep their job here and go move somewhere else. So,
I see what you mean. Like you mean smaller, like it's bringing the world closer to them.
So in some
internet.
ways, I think that affords like, and they're used to that. And I also think that like, I don't know. I mean, if you've grown up hearing about like and being able to see in real time what's happening all over the world in other cities, then like actually being in those cities isn't as crazy. Oh yeah, I know that place. I've seen that place. Like I don't know.
And if you're just on your computer all the time, it's like, what difference is there between this city or that city?
Yeah. Just scroll TikTok in Detroit, and
it's all the same.
Too, yeah.
Well, and they're so aware of the world around them. How can you not be when you're that connected? And I think that's grown people's love and their burden for other places and other people. Yeah.
That's really cool. All right. Well, thanks, Doug and Catherine, for joining us this morning. And before we really wrap up, do you guys have any resources you want to point our listeners to?
Yeah. been reading the Gen Z Volume 3 book published by the Barna Research Institute. They have 3 volumes, but the third one is obviously the most recent. And I think it just gives a wide swath of information about their religious beliefs and, their beliefs about LGBTQ and kind of everything. So I would definitely read that.
Great. Doug?
Yeah, I was thinking that book is great. So the Next Generation May Know by Jane Warner Wallace and Sean McDowell is really good. And then if you want to know more about like teaching or preaching to students, Shane Coulter has a teaching from our Xenos Summer Institute from I think 2 years ago. That's really good.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for joining us on Dwell on These Things. And look out for our next episode, which is actually going to cover something that we barely touched today, or just slightly touched today on, how can we effectively win young women? Like there's some struggles with winning young women, and what's that look like? And so we're gonna cover that in our next episode. For any more resources, go ahead and swing over to our website at dwellcc.org. Thanks again.